Mr. Majority Floor Leader.
This is how the session ends.
That clears the desk at this point in time.
Well, it may clear the desk, but we've kind of had our fill of you, particularly at that suit. Everybody shoot.
Exhausted lawmakers honoring their leader with a traditional rubber band salute.
I think Jim Anderson hit me in the head.
But there's much more next on Capitol Outlook.
I get no respect.
Hello, I'm Richard Hager. Welcome to the 8th and final week of Capitol Outlook. The final Senate session began with a quote of the day from singer Willie Nelson. Turn the lights out, the party is over. And joining me in our studio at the Capitol to talk about that 2-month party, or whatever it was, Senator Phil Nicholas, Senate Majority Leader, Senator Bernadine Kraft, Senate Minority Whip, and Darrell Ehrlick, editor of the Casper Star-Tribune. Welcome, all of you.
Thank you.
Now, Senator Nicholas, I have to ask, you're at the back of the chamber, so how true was your aim?
Very good.
Now, rubber bands are, of course, symbolic.
They're lethal.
But not regulated by the feds yet, right?
They're not yet regulated. We are able to have rubber bands.
Well, obviously a long session, a lot of stuff that you went over. As you look back over the 2 months, how would you rate the session? What were the biggest goals and were they accomplished, do you think?
Well, I tell you, it was a different session than all those that I've ever been involved in before, because we had a series of rolling events that rolled out. Unfortunately, we had to deal with the issue of the State Department of Education, the reorganization there. We had the fuel tax, which was a monumental new change in direction of policy. And then we had the gun bills. We had a variety of issues that came up, and all sort of wrapping up with the lottery bill. And so it seems like it was surge after surge as you went through the session. And part of, I think, the hardest effort of this session was trying to get folks to be able to bite off each piece of action they needed to take, make sure that they were deliberating carefully, that the debate was being done, and then just move to the next issue.
What's your take on the session?
And I would certainly agree with that. It was indeed a series of monumental kind of occurrences. And it was fun for me because this is my first term in the Senate. I was in the House for 3 terms, and it was a really wonderful experience.
And we'll get to all of those, I think.
I think so. I think so. But in addition to the issues raised by Good Majority Floor Leader, an issue that was prominent for me was Medicaid and Medicaid reform. I serve on the Labor Health Committee, so spent a lot of time working on that. And one of the things that I was really pleased with leadership was the Medicaid expansion bill. Failed in committee, failed in the Labor Health Committee, but it was heard on the floor anyway, because the thought was that even though it failed in committee, that was too big a bill to not be heard and not be discussed live, if you will, where citizens throughout the state could hear. I was obviously disappointed we didn't pass it, but I think we laid some good groundwork and had some great discussions. So that was the other big issue for me, in addition to all the ones that you mentioned.
Well, Darrell, I mean, I don't know if you give grades or anything like that, but you know, what's your sense of this past session now that it's over,
right. Barely. Right. It was. I mean, I've had the benefit of covering 5 different state legislatures, and this is I think by far the most productive in the shortest amount of time that I've seen. You can probably have a lot of debate on did you like each one of these issues, but they were huge issues. They were tackled efficiently, and kudos to leadership really for the way in which they structured it, the way in which they handled social bills, which have at times derailed other states and other legislatures, kind of blown the whole sessions apart. So yeah, this was monumental. I think the word that was used was monumental, and there were a lot of really big things accomplished, and some things not quite accomplished enough.
Well, you know, Senator Nicholas, you're a longtime budget hawk, and of course the state was facing declining prices in our oil, gas, coal markets. What were your main considerations and, you know, other budget makers as you looked at the supplementary budget this time around?
Well, my biggest concern with the budget was that we did have to temper the budget. We had a trajectory that we had created out of really being spoiled out of some remarkable years of increasing income. And you had to trim it down. You had to bring it back in, and you had to also do that in a way that just didn't abandon the economic development efforts that we were looking to do. So we held on to the engineering college. We held on to some capital construction, some highway construction. At the same time, we did begin to trim the bow down so that we could start looking out into the future. You know, you're left with some concerns. I mean, I look back at the revenues that we had in the early 90s and see that we had a slow increase year by year, and the inflationary impacts were such that it felt at the time like we had no money. And if the experts are telling us is correct that we may expect to have a 10-year plateau on natural gas revenues, we could be entering into that phase. And when you get into there, obviously one of the biggest concerns you have is how about state employee salaries? How are you going to address those in an environment where your inflationary cost of operating buildings, heat, your retirement system are engulfing all your disposable earnings and leaving nothing for salary increase.
So what side do you think you came down on?
Well, I think we came in sort of a balance. I mean, although I'd have to say that it would have been nice to have a 2 to 3% increase in salaries. We decided we had to give something. It was a one-time 1%. It's a little bit of, you know, soft serve ice cream, I guess. You get it once and it's gone, but it was something. I mean, it was more a recognition that, hey, we have not forgotten about you. At the same time, you do look at the private sector and you see that the private sector is struggling. And a lot of our resources are going into medical care, health care, and retirement. And I'm not sure the employees appreciate how much more we're putting in each year to preserve those institutions.
Well, I think what you're pointing out here is, of course, you know, the budget and all of its considerations sprawl across everything that the state government does.
Sure does.
What's your sense of the priorities that were tackled and then met to whatever degree?
With the budget-wise, I really appreciated that we were able to do something for our public employees. Of course, is it enough? I never think it is, but we did something, and I thought that was good. I felt a little bit better about our cities, towns, and counties, because I've worried a lot about our local governments and how are we doing in terms of supporting them. I think we did pretty well this time with our cities, towns, and counties. I worry about our seniors, and we put $200,000 more back. There was quite a number trimmed from senior center's budget, and $200,000 went back in. I thought that was a good thing. So I would agree with Senator Nicholas that I felt like it was balanced. You know, do you ever get everything you want? Of course not. But I did feel like it was balanced. I felt like we're preparing ourselves for the budget session where we can be thoughtful and deliberative about
Not a lot of big visible budget fights this time around.
No.
No, I think the harder fights were really between about last summer when we began the discussions with the governor with respect to his priorities. And when we talk about the balance that you see, a lot of that was really give and take with the governors that we had. I mean, I think it's accurate when you say that the Joint Appropriations Committee tends to be hawkish and wanting to really look at a longer distance. And it's easy to do that as a legislature, particularly on the Senate side, where you look at generational, and then you've got the governor saying, look, that's fine, but we've got some immediate needs that we've got to attend to. And that's where I think that balance sort of worked out. We created that SIPRA account as an opportunity to take care of some of our immediate needs.
You know, the biggest item in any budget, of course, the Department of Health. And Darrell, I know that you've written some about this, that the legislature voted down expansion of Medicaid coverage, even though a study by our own Director of Health showed it could have saved $47 million. What's your take on the politics of that?
I think anything that remotely has the smell of the federal government is anathema here. I think that there really is, there's a recoil or a reflexive reaction to it.
Smelly money? I mean.
Well, I mean, there's concern, I think, that there's going to be, that the money is going to have strings, and there's always strings attached to any federal money. But that's not someone like the Department of Transportation or the Department of Education, which we take funding from as well from a federal level. Our question is, this is great, so we don't want to go down that road. That's fine. The question that we've repeatedly asked is, what's the next option? What is going to happen? Because you can't, it doesn't seem like there are definitive proposals, so what are you going to do with those people? And our concerns, and I think on both sides of the aisle, you saw the concern, we don't want to be shutting out the people who can least afford to be shut out and least fight for the care and services they need.
Well, you know, Senator Nicholas, other Republican states right now are actually jumping on board with this, who had previously resisted that. Didn't you want the $47 million?
Well, I wanted the $47 million, but you can't do the analysis simply by looking at the net gain that you would have. In order to take that $47 million, you had to commit to increasing a program that over 6 to 7 years was an $800 million gorilla. And you know, I can still remember going back to when we created the acquired brain injury program, and Dr. Miley, who was in the Department of Health, he was on the legislative committee at the time, and he said, you know, you're going to regret this decision, because once you move down that path, you can't move out. The program expands and it balloons and begins to consume more resources at the expense of other folks that need care. It's a very expensive program. And the analogy sort of worked with this too. If you believe that, hey, we pick up $47 million, and the $700 to $800 million that is supplied to us in order to achieve that result is on the 7th year is going to continue. That's one scenario. But if you believe, as many of us do, that that source of revenue declines, then you're looking at a $100 million a year deficit. One of the things as I looked at it is that if you knew that you could take, essentially what we're talking about is about another $100 million a year new money coming in for this group of people that are uninsured and not covered. If you knew that by supplying money for those, that everybody else's health care costs would be reduced because of the duplication, your insurance would go down, my insurance come down, and that money wouldn't just go into the system and just end up in the coffers of hospitals and drug companies and manufacturers of equipment, it'd have been an easy decision. But if you believe, as I think many of us do, that money just gets taken out, it doesn't cost shift, it doesn't reduce your costs, hospitals end up with higher reserves, CAT scan companies, GE ends up with higher profits, and the drug companies suck it out, and it's all gone.
I understand the fear, but you know, in talking with Tom Forsland, our director of health, who was on just a few weeks back, he really wanted that money. He had some specific uses for it. Well, what's your analysis on this?
If I could jump in there just a bit, because I did have the luxury of serving on the Labor Health Committee.
Yes.
So that meant I was involved with the study and involved with Tom Forsland's presentation. And we did really want the Medicaid expansion. We really did. And I say we as in me and the Department of Health folks, certainly not the Labor Health Committee, because I was the only one that voted in favor of it on that committee. But what we saw is a point you made, that we are providing insurance for those that can least afford it. We of course are having to do Medicaid. We're doing Medicaid, but this was the optional expansion of Medicaid program. And when you looked at the report as it was presented by the Department of Health, we would be fully vested or reimbursed by the federal government, 100%. And then it would titrate down to 90% reimbursement. So then I think the issue is what is going to happen when it titrates.
And you know, we have so much ground to cover. I have a feeling we're going to get back to this at some point.
Well, and I guess that was the thing that did make me feel good, was I do believe we're going to talk about this in the budget session.
You know, Senator Nicholas, you had mentioned, of course, the Senate file which removed most of the administrative duties Superintendent of Education, Cindy Hill. Overall, just we'll spend a moment on this. Was it worth all the distraction, do you think?
Well, I think it's something that had to be done. When we look at the department, the operations, and we're really looking at the statutory functions that we had assigned to that agency, principally since Campbell won a lawsuit, we had reached the point where we weren't getting information out. The activities that we had assigned, the funding that we were assigning for certain projects that the legislature needed to get done were not being completed. And I'll just say anecdotally, since I've been out, and I just go out to the districts, they see a remarkable change already. They're getting information, information's flowing. It was an unfortunate circumstance, but our hardest issue there was trying to say we know that there are personalities involved. We had to separate those and go look at the structural setup of the department. How did it develop over the course of the state? What was wrong, what wasn't working, look at other administrations, and divorce, if you will, the considerations of the personality decisions to the structural organization, and I think we did a good job of doing that.
This is a testament to the leadership and to the, I mean, I can say I've never seen two parties come together with such resolve and kind of speed too. One of the things that's interesting is we just kind of gauge it from our the interaction we have with our readers and letters to the editor, and besides the topic of guns, which I'm sure we may talk about, I just have a feeling.
I'd like to get to
right. Was Senate File 104, which was the reassignment of duties. But we've covered it, covered the Department of Education, and I don't think there's any way that you can reasonably read the LSO reports, the auditor's reports, and not know that there are serious structural problems within how they were complying with legislative mandate or how they were spending, how it was spending money, especially in leadership. I think the other thing that's important to realize is where Wyoming stands relative to the states that border it. Look at the graduation rates. Look at even the ACT scores that came out this week. We did better, but better against ourselves. Look at how the other states did. So I think this was absolutely necessary, and I commend leadership for taking, and the whole group for taking a bold stance, because it was not universally popular.
Well, we have less than 5 minutes, and Senator Kraft, I'd like to go to the whole question which just got resolved this week. The question of whether Wyoming will become the 44th state to have a lottery. And it came down to some last-minute compromises.
It did.
We weren't pioneering on that one. What's your sense? Looks like Powerball is coming.
Powerball, I hope, is coming. You know, I have been involved with a piece of lottery legislation all the years I've been down here, which isn't that many. It started way ahead of me. I'm very happy to see it for several reasons. One is the bill now is only Powerball. And I got a bit frustrated with people who were so worried about compulsive gambling and gambling addiction. This is not, to my way of thinking, gambling. This, to my way of thinking, is like buying a raffle ticket.
It's not even scratch tickets.
That's right. You can't even do a scratch ticket. This, to me, is like buying a raffle ticket. You buy the ticket and you have to wait and see if you're going to win. So that delayed gratification, the bells and whistles don't go off, guns don't sound. I also know that there's a little cantina just south of us, over the border. Last year they did $3 million in lottery sales.
Well, you know, Senator Nicholas, well, actually, you know, she says bingo is faster, but you voted against this. You actually voted for it the first time, but when the funding or the money from it didn't go to schools, you voted against it.
I voted against it, for it, and then against it.
Mr. Carey,
Well, I felt very strongly that, you know, it is a state initiative. There's going to be a lot of cost to implement this program. There are going to be some social costs. And I feel strongly that those revenues should have benefited the state. And it is a concern to me that you say, well, the cities, when the cities first came, they said, look, we simply want to keep our revenues here. So these are dollars, these are sales going out of state, and so they win on bringing the revenues, the sales back into Wyoming. Then they said, well, now we want the profits. But the state, you get to take all of the cost to administer the programs. If there are Medicaid issues, if there are mental health issues, you pick up all those costs. It's not a lot of money. I thought that there would have been a great opportunity to say, well, if there's a small amount of money, let's put it in the Common School Permanent Land Fund. and build it over time, and we look years back, we could say we did something good with that money.
Well, it will be revisited,
But
though, in I believe 4 years' time.
It will be, but
something like that.
I didn't win, and that's
We
that's
just
the way
have
it
about
goes.
over 2 minutes, and we have to get to the gun bills because some passed the House and somehow stalled in the Senate. All fingers point to Senator Nicholas. You didn't want to let them have a vote. Why?
Well, it's a complicated, we don't have an hour to talk about
Can I
it.
sum it up? You felt that the tactics being used by the groups pushing for the bills were not entirely appropriate.
That's true. It had reached the point to where the legislators were no longer able to engage in civil debate. They weren't able to make amendments that they thought were appropriate without being harassed and having emails that you wouldn't show to your children, you could see that the debate had been lost.
Okay.
And when I went back and looked at the real bills, we have strong gun laws, and there comes a time where you just have to say, time out, this is not the way we debate it in Wyoming.
Okay.
We're not going to do this.
We have 1 minute. Darrell, your take on this, because of course a last-minute amendment to a bison hunting bill has reinvigorated the gun rights people.
Yeah, it's an interesting law. It sets appropriates $250,000 to the Attorney General to defend it. It seemed like this was a
Prevent any feds from interfering with bison
seemed like
hunting.
it seemed an odd. It almost was an odd lightning rod. Get it in there. Some cynics might say that was this the way that lawmakers could have it both ways. Say we didn't pass the nullification bill, but we did set aside money.
So we could see a court challenge possibly coming.
Well, there could be on
Could be. Could
Okay.
be.
Well, we are.
What it does, I'll say just
Yeah,
shortly.
last word.
That is the focus on the rule of law, and it says, if you have problems with the federal government, we have an attorney general, we have an executive branch, and this is the approach to take.
And the clock has ticked. So that's the last word. Our thanks to Senator Phil Nicholas, Senator Bernadine Kraft, and Darrell Ehrlick. And now we're going to close this season of political coverage with a non-political look at the Capitol. Every year, around 25,000 people, mostly kids, take the State House tour. And this time, our videographer, Matthew Wright, went along. Like our show, it only takes 30 minutes, but it will leave you with a very different Capitol outlook.
Welcome to the State Capitol. We're glad to have you join us today. We're going to take a quick tour around the building. If you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand and I'll try and answer those for you.
Has anybody actually fallen off these before?
Not that I'm aware of, so we'd like to keep it that way.
So high up.
They broke ground in September 1886 and finished the first part in 1888. So the pictures along here show that. This is how it looked in the first part. This shows when they dedicated the cornerstone. Here's where they added on the two smaller wings, and then when they finally finished and added the House and Senate. And this is how the dome looked in 1902. In the late 70s, they did restoration painting throughout the building, and that's when they changed that area and added the state and territorial seals. The stained glass came from England. The outside of the dome is copper, but because it tarnishes so badly in 1900 is when they started doing the gold leafing. Can anybody tell me how much gold it takes to cover the whole entire dome? Any guesses?
Maybe 2,500 pounds.
Okay, how about, so you think a lot. How about if I tell you it only takes 1 ounce of gold? So just a little bit that would fit right here in your hand. Okay, have any of you ever been between here and Laramie and seen the big Lincoln Monument? Yeah. Okay, well this is the original plaster mold for that. This plaque was dedicated by the Oak Ridge High School Student Council and the U.S. Corps of Army Engineers, and they dedicated a plaque for each capital city. And this is part of one of the columns from the 65th floor from one of the Twin Towers. So they dedicated these plaques to honor the people who lost their lives on 9/11. The floors are marble. The white tiles came from Italy, and the black tiles came from Wyoming. And as we're walking around in the black tiles, you're going to see fossil shells. There's a really good one right here. The woodwork is cherry wood that they brought from Ohio by train. The craftsmen were Amish, and that's a type of religion. And the Amish believe that you should strive for perfection, but that only God creates perfect things. So they purposely put an imperfection in their work. You'll see that this second spindle here is upside down. This is the only one in the building. And that's their way of honoring God, and they still do that in their work today. And on the wall over there are some of the oldest pictures of the senators and representatives. They look a lot different than they do now, don't you think? Okay, you guys are going to go sit and listen on the Senate side, so you have to be really quiet while you're in there and just listen. If you have cell phones, you need to make sure you turn those off.
Senate File 104, third reading of the Senate File.
Know a little bit about why, and look about the Constitution at that time as to an interesting notion that the state would be the...
So did you find that interesting while you were in there?
I saw a lot of people with a lot of messes on their desks.
How are you? Good to see you. Nice to see you today. What's your name? How are you?
I just wanted to thank you all for coming. It was really good to have you here. You had lots of good questions, and if you're ever around and you want to bring your parents or other family members or your friends, just come on in and visit us.
So thank